China humiliates the Biden administration as their plans for a globalist reset hits a massive wall. In this video, we're going to take a look at what happened in Anchorage, Alaska at the first official meeting between the Biden administration and China, how China made it absolutely clear they believe America is on the decline, and what China's insults mean for the rise of what scholars are calling a multipolar world order. You are not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Wonderful to be with you. As always, we're here to give you each and every single day conservative hope in the midst of these turbulent and trying times, helping you to think better so you can feel better and provide for you a patriot path to freedom. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. And before we dive in here, make sure to click on the link below and head on over to my special website for my Patriot food supplies. We've seen with this whole pandemic insanity, we cannot wait for an emergency to happen before we respond to one, and no one makes preparing for an emergency more ridiculously easy and affordable than our good friends over at My Patriot Supply. Gang, they're simply the best. Their food kits last up to 25 years in storage. They include breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. And if you act now, you can save $50 off a full 4-week emergency food supply when you click on the link below to my special website. But don't wait. This is a limited time offer. I got my food supply. Make sure you get yours. Click on that link below or go to preparewithsteve.com and save $50 off your very own 4-week emergency food supply today. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. If Joe Biden and the Democratic puppet masters who pull his strings thought that they were going to usher in the great globalist reset after 4 years of nationalist populism under President Trump, they have hit a solid brick wall of reality last week. And that brick wall is China and Russia. As many of you know, the Biden administration held their first high-level meeting with the nation of China in Anchorage, Alaska last week. And really, to the shock of the international press that were present at the meeting, the delegation from China absolutely mocked, ridiculed, and insulted the American delegation before the eyes of the world. Now, what we have to understand is that diplomats are the liaisons that guarantee peace between nations. Diplomats, by definition, practice diplomacy, which over the centuries has developed a very strict protocol of speaking in both complimentary and yet vague statements so as to never insult the other party. This is the way we avoid conflict, which of course could escalate into armed conflict, God forbid. And so generally speaking, when nations come together through diplomatic delegations, everything is very scripted and organized so as to maximize peaceful and constructive dialogue. And that was precisely the case in Anchorage. The two parties met, the Chinese delegation, the American delegation, and each were scheduled to give a 4-minute opening remark. And again, this is an opportunity for the delegation to express their appreciation to the other delegation, what they hope to work through, all sorts of niceties and goals and the like. But to the shock of everyone present, and we're talking here the international press, the Chinese delegation completely dismissed and disregarded the protocols and smashed diplomatic norms. The Chinese delegation was led by the director of the Central Foreign Affairs Commission of the Chinese Communist Party, a fellow by the name of Yang Shishur, and he gave the opening statement on behalf of the Chinese delegation, and he completely ignored the scheduled 4-minute time limit, and instead he spoke for a full 15 minutes. And for the entire time, he absolutely ripped the United States, headed by the Biden administration and is represented by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Here are just some of the highlights of what he said. Quote, "What China and the international community follow or uphold is the United Nations-centered international system and the international order underpinned by international law, not what is advocated by a small number of countries of the so-called rules-based international order. And the United States has its style, United States-style democracy, and China has the Chinese-style democracy. It is not just up to the American people, but also the people of the world to evaluate how the United States has done in advancing its own democracy. We believe that it's important for the United States to change its own image and to stop advancing its own democracy in the rest of the world. Many people within the United States actually have little confidence in the democracy of the United States, and they have various views regarding the government of the United States. We hope that the United States will do better on human rights. China's made steady progress in human rights, and the fact is that there are many problems with the United States regarding human rights, which is admitted by the U.S. itself as well. And the challenge facing the United States in human rights are deeply seated. They didn't just emerge over the past 4 years, such as Black Lives Matter. It didn't come up only recently. So we do hope that for our two countries, it's important that we manage our respective affairs well instead of deflecting the blame on somebody else in this world. So let me say here that in front of the Chinese side, the United States does not have the qualification to say that it wants to speak to China from a position of strength. The U.S. side was not even qualified to say such things even 20 years or 30 years back, because that is not the way to deal with the Chinese people. Now, just so you know, this is being widely reported as nothing short of a major public reprimanding by China of the United States. And China made it unequivocally clear that they have no intention of rolling over and allowing the Biden administration to dictate to them the international norms that they're supposed to abide by. It was pretty stunning stuff in terms of just how bold these statements were. And this new Secretary of State, he was clearly shocked. And the two delegations left the meeting with little to show for it other than the Biden administration's total humiliation. Now, if that weren't bad enough, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov paid a visit to China just after the delegation returned from Anchorage. Both Russia and China are being heavily sanctioned. Russia for their supposed election interference, which is laughable at this point, and China for their alleged human rights abuses against the country's Uyghur population in its northwestern Xinjiang province. And so China and Russia are teaming up together in an effort to move away from the US dollar and Western-controlled international payment systems so as to reduce the significance of the sanctions imposed on Russia and China by Western nations. And that is key to China and Russia's geopolitical strategy here. The United States, the European Union, Britain, and Canada have all imposed sanctions on a handful of Chinese officials as well as on Russian officials. And the question that Russia and China are considering here is, how do we relativize the financial leverage that Western nations have in being able to unilaterally impose these sanctions against us? Again, you'll note, it's not the United Nations imposing these sanctions. It's not the international body. It's a cohort of Western nations led by Washington, D.C., imposing or attempting to impose their unilateral will on China and Russia. And as the Chinese delegation made it clear in Anchorage, they are not going to roll over and allow Western liberals to get away with that. So what's going on here? Where is this newfound confidence exemplified by China in openly challenging the United States coming from? Well, before we do get into that, if you are looking for some encouragement and a hopeful alternative to all the fake news nonsense that's being spewed out each and every day from the leftist likes of CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times, you're going to find no better antidote than what's in the pages of my book, The Return of Christendom. Now, again, do not take my word for it. Just read through the reviews on Amazon. There's over 260 of them, and you'll see how this book cuts through all the cynicism and despair that we just so often feel living in this crazy leftist globalist world. And page after page, I give you all the data, the statistics, the indicators that show nothing less than the rise of a new conservative Christian majority emerging throughout the United States and even in Europe. And it's already transforming the world map into a more nationalist, populist, and traditionalist world. And if you click on that link below, we're offering it now for a limited time at a 50% discount. That's right, you get it for half off, but do not wait. It is a limited time offer. Click on that link, get your book at a super discount today, and arm yourself with the information you need to crush the despair of fake news once and for all. All right, so where is China and Russia getting this newfound confidence in pushing back against the United States and Western liberalism in general? In a word, scholars are recognizing that we are increasingly entering into what they're calling a multipolar world. Okay, the term pole here is a symbol of the center of a nation or civilization, the power base, as it were. So for decades in the 20th century, we lived in what scholars called a bipolar world. I know that sounds a bit odd, but obviously a bipolar world is one comprised of the two major civilizational powers during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union collapsed on Christmas of 1991, scholars recognized that literally almost overnight, we entered into what's called a unipolar world, with the United States, the hands-down dominant superpower, dominant economically, dominant militaristically, dominant in international relations. For the next couple of decades, we were clearly a unipolar world, and this is where the neocon came in and basically argued that we needed to turn the world into a collective pro-American, pro-liberal global order, neoliberals as well. And so America did get used to telling the world basically how to conduct its affairs. We had no problem imposing our one-size-fits-all vision of life on other nations, tying economic aid to their adopting our increasingly woke left-wing norms characteristic of our permanent political class. But increasingly, scholars have recognized that that world is waning and a new multipolar world is emerging. Now, many of you may be familiar with the conservative Russian philosopher and geopolitical strategist Alexander Dugin, who's on the forefront of fostering a multipolar world and what he calls the fourth political theory. So as the 20th century was the century of the big three political theories, right? Western liberalism, Soviet communism, and Nazi fascism. 21st century is becoming the century of the fourth political theory, which is a return to nation culture, custom, and tradition, where each people group throughout the world can live freely without coercion from any one unipolar power. And it appears that this is precisely the kind of world that is in fact emerging before our very eyes. So while the Biden administration may have thought that the following years were going to be a period of the great globalist reset, it's becoming increasingly clear that China, Russia, India, and a number of other nations have very different plans for the 21st century. Now, before you go, make sure to like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to my channel. Definitely click on below and check out our awesome merch. And you definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded. It's on how the border crisis and cancel culture together are destroying the Democrats as populism surges under Biden. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.